All right, well, my next guest is an investor, a businessman, a best-selling author, and a motivational speaker. He is best known for his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which was the best-selling personal finance book of all time. He has written a total of 15 books, which have combined sales of over 26 million copies. His name is Robert Kiyosaki. Robert, it's an absolute honor to have you joining me today on Follow the Money Weekly.
Oh, I'm honored to be on your program. Like we were saying, you had two of my heroes before, Steve Forbes and G. Edwards Griffin are my heroes.
Robert, years ago, I stumbled onto your work. I was browsing at a bookstore. I can usually be found in the business section of a bookstore anywhere in town. I stumbled across a book that had a very unusual title. It said, "If you want to be rich and happy, don't go to school." And I caught my eye. I picked it up. I mean, this was one of your very first books. It offered some very unorthodox financial advice at the time. And since then, your unorthodox approach to teaching financial concepts has turned into a huge empire. I mean, you have books and seminars and financial coaching and the like. In the middle of all this economic crisis that's occurring right now, what is life like for Robert Kiyosaki right now in the middle of all of this?
Well, 2007 and 2010 have been the best years ever as far as my investments goes. Business was a little tough because I was in a lawsuit with my former partners. So that part was tough, but other than that, the business was fantastic. I've never made so much money in such a short period of time. And so it's been just fabulous.
You actually saw the current economic crisis coming. You were writing about it in your book. You wrote a book called Prophecy that the financial media just hammered at the time whenever it came out, where you saw things coming. And I believe you still believe that the major economic crisis we haven't even seen yet. Is that right?
That's my prediction, yes. And Prophecy, on page 7 of Rich Dad's Prophecy, it says, you have until 2010 to be prepared. So here it is, 2010, and I like to practice what I preach, and that's why, I have never done so well financially. I was just in the right place, right time, right position. As the markets came down, I thought I died and went to heaven, So it's just been fantastic.
Well, for those who have never read your mega bestseller, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, give a brief overview of the book and how your rich dad changed your view of money.
Well, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a true story with my two fathers. I grew up in Hawaii, fourth-generation Japanese-American. And my poor dad was the head of education for the state of Hawaii. And he was a PhD, great guy, great father. But as you know, school teacher. And school teachers have this idea that the government should take care of you, and the labor unions are king. My father was head of the labor union also. The NEA, National Education Association, is the biggest single largest labor union in the world, I think. And they affect our education. And so that was my poor dad's side of the family. I was to go to school, get a safe, secure job, and work for the government, and the government will take care of you, kind of the Obama plan. Whereas my rich dad was a capitalist, and he was my best friend's father, and starting at age 9, he started teaching me about money, playing Monopoly. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is this contrast between a socialist and a capitalist. And both good people. And so I had to kind of choose between the two, who I was going to listen to. And then in 1973, I went to, and I served my country, unlike Clinton or Bush. And I went to fight in Vietnam, and when I came home, my dad was fired, my poor dad. And, he was unemployed at age 50. And suddenly I come back from war, and I said, Dad, what should I do, now that I graduated from college, I'm a pilot, I can go fly, what do you think I should do? He says, well, go back to school, get your master's degree, get your PhD, and go work for the government. I said, Dad, I'd rather go back to Vietnam and kill people. It's more honest, So that was kind of when I had to grow up. I was 26 years old at the time in 1973, and I said, I'm going to listen to my rich dad, and I'm going to become an entrepreneur, a capitalist, and an investor. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad is basically what my rich dad taught me about money, and the reason I'm doing well financially is very simply because, as you know, our school systems have zero financial education. So they, like my poor dad, they believe in giving your money to the pension plan, and And you look at why our country is going broke is because we have so many public servants with huge retirement plans. And I just don't, you're entitled to your point of view. I just don't like that attitude. So I'm more a capitalist, not a socialist.
I studied economics at the university level, Robert, and even, throughout high school, of course, there was no economics class that I can recall. Very little personal finance concepts. They don't teach you how to write a check, even in high school. When I got to the economics or the university level and studied economics, again, it was just the socialist Keynesian kind of model that was crammed down my throat. I had to go outside of the university to find any semblance of, what was really going on. It was all done through self-study.
Right.
And one of the things that I really appreciate about your work is that you help dispel many of the financial lies that are out there that many people have been held captive to for years. Some of these things are that you point out specifically. I'm quoting you, go to school, get a job, work hard, save money, get out of debt, invest for the long term. These are concepts that are sacred cows. Talk about how these things are actually, in many ways, lies that hold people financially captive from actually experiencing financial freedom.
Well, try this one. Get a job, work hard, save money, live below your means, and buy a house because your house is an asset.
Mm.
If you look at Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the reason I got hate mail from my realtor friends was because I said your house is not an asset. And then I wrote Prophecy in 2002, predicting the biggest stock market crash, which is going to come around 2015, 2016. And, they just get really upset with me because I'm shooting these sacred cows right in the field. You look at the people that our schools invite to teach financial education. They invite bankers in, and they invite financial planners. Now, I'm sure they're good people, but those are the very people who work for the people that brought on the financial crisis. They work for the Goldmans, and they work for Merrill Lynch's, and they work for Bank of America's. And so these school teachers who wouldn't know a good deal from a bad deal don't know good education from bad education. And so we wonder why we have so many people today are homeless. I mean, millions of homes have been in foreclosure. And so in 1997, when Rich Dad, Poor Dad came out, it's your house is not an asset. People would call me up and say, obviously you haven't gone to college. And I said, I did go to college. Well, you don't know anything about economics. I said, what does an asset versus liability have to do with economics, idiot?
Right.
So they just don't understand it. And this is my whole complaint, that there's a difference between communism and socialism, and what we're teaching is communism. Mm. And I'm not against communism per se. I'm not a right winger, all this stuff. But basically, what Marx said was that we have the proletariat, and the proletariat are people without any assets. They have nothing. And so you have the gentry, I forget what they call them, but the rich guys, and then you have the proletariat. And our schools are pumping out proletariat. They're people who get a job, but they don't own anything. They think their house is an asset. They think their job is an asset. They think their 401k is an asset. Those are all unfunded liabilities. And so when I talk to people like that, they don't understand that I'm actually criticizing the fact that most of our school teachers are communists. They don't even know it. They don't know it. That's the problem. And my poor dad was a good man. He thought he was a socialist. He was really a communist. He owns nothing. A job is not an asset. Your house is not an asset. Your 401k is not an asset. That's the whole thing. I'm not saying that one's right or wrong. I'm saying when you're going to educate people, we wonder why we have so many people today dependent upon the government to take care of us. That's the real problem.
Well, and the average, and you know this, Robert, the average yuppie retirement plan today is a house and a 401k. They're both government controlled, which makes it very, very difficult going forward. But then you always have that statistic that you see over and over again where 95% of Americans retire dead or dead broke when they reach age 65. Whatever we're being taught today just simply doesn't work. That's why the unorthodox concepts that you talk about in your book, it's very interesting that not only were you saying these things all along, but right now in the middle of the economic crisis, you're doing better than ever.
Yeah, this is absolutely fantastic. And if you had a little financial education, you wouldn't be in this trouble. But I'll say it again, the problem with the education system is run by the ANEA, the National Education Association, what Steve Forbes calls the National Extortion Organization Association. And my father was the head of the teachers union. And as a young kid, I didn't really have to be that good at economics, but I knew a communist when I saw one. And a communist, I'm not saying they're bad people, this is really the strange thing. What you do is you have what Marx talked about was the war between the bourgeois and the proletariat. And I said, what you guys are doing is you're pumping out proletariat with nothing. When you teach a kid your house is an asset, you're lying to them. When you teach them your 401k is an asset, you're lying to them. You're lying. And that's what I get upset about. I don't care if you're a communist or a socialist or a fascist, but just don't be stupid one. You know, I mean, I don't care if you're a Protestant, a Mormon, a Jew, a Buddhist, or Hindu. You know, it's not your choice. Just don't be a stupid one. That's all I'm saying.
Well, you know, Robert, I mean, you know, Steve Forbes wrote a book called How Capitalism Will Save Us. You mentioned he was a guest on the program not too long ago. Why don't you explain for our audience what the difference between, you know, because you brought up communists quite a bit, the difference between a capitalist and a communist. What's the difference?
Right, that's a good question because I fought for capitalism twice. I didn't fight for socialism or communism. I went to Vietnam twice. And only after I went to Vietnam did I start saying, what the heck's a commie? The Marines aren't the smartest guys on earth, you know. I started studying it. I said, wait a minute, you know, so what Marx was talking about was how the proletariat was being oppressed by the bourgeois. And the proletariat is basically a working class person with nothing. When I started looking, I said, that's my dad. These guys are the intellectuals, and nothing wrong with intellectuals. They come out of school, they get a job. A job is not an asset. You work for the capitalist. I mean, you actually set your child up to work for the capitalist rather than become a capitalist. See, my rich dad was training me to be a capitalist. And then they have nothing. Then they're teaching their house is an asset, which is not. It's the bank's asset. And they have a 401k, which is, you know, the bank's asset again. I said, these poor buggers, you guys are actually training people to work for the capitalists. And why are you angry at them? So my thing is, why not give a child a choice? Do you want to come out of school a communist or a capitalist? Make up your mind. And what Steve was talking about is, if we train people to be capitalists, we wouldn't have such a big problem. And it's the same thing with rich dad, poor dad, between a socialist or a communist and a capitalist. And I have assets. I own businesses. I own commercial real estate. I own golf courses, resorts. I have oil wells. I am a capitalist. But I didn't ever want a job. And that's what our schools are teaching kids to become, to come out and work for the rich. Why don't we train people to be rich? Why don't we teach them to be capitalists?